Hello and welcome to my first video from Cornwall. And I know I said I was moving to a place without a garden or any facilities, but just so happens that my neighbour has installed this lovely greenhouse sometime last year, and he'd like a hand growing some stuff. So we're going to pool our resources and grow some peppers and tomatoes, chilies, all that sort of good stuff, and gives me a chance to make a few unexpected videos. So today we've just been setting up and getting our stuff sorted out. So peppers and chilies, they need a fairly long growing season, so getting them started in January or early February is a good idea. They also need a nice warm temperature to germinate, so ideally you'd be looking at 21, 22, 23 degrees, something like that. And for that reason, it can be a good idea to start them off indoors. The temperature is possibly quite good for it indoors if you've got a nice warm spot. But the problem is that as soon as they've germinated, they want the maximum amount of light, and at this time of year, the light levels, depends where you live, of course, but here in England, the light levels aren't that great. So if, say, you've got your pepper starting on even in a fairly bright window, maybe you've got them on the windowsill, they will go quite leggy, and that's really not what we want, especially if you're going to if you're growing small fruited peppers and chilies, and you don't necessarily have that much height where you're going to plant them. The last thing we want is to start growing leggy plants. On the other hand, we can start them off outdoors. In order to do that, obviously we need a covered space like a greenhouse or a polytunnel, and then we really want heated propagators. Now, I've done it a long time ago with just regular propagators, and I've done it outdoors, and I've been successful with it. But a heated propagator gives you some huge advantages. It will keep the plants at a reasonable temperature overnight, and during the daytime you're going to get a really good warm temperature in there for good germination. Now, the heated propagator is a little bit limited in the amount of lift it can provide. So depending on the model, maybe you'll get 12, 13, 14 degrees of maximum above the ambient temperature. So of course it depends what your ambient temperature is. If it's -10, the propagator is not going to help you, and you need to start them off indoors. Where we are, nighttime temperatures, they're not really that low. I don't expect in the enclosed environment of the greenhouse the temperature in these propagators to go below 10 degrees, and 10's about as low as you want for the tender plants, the peppers, the chilies, the aubergines and the tomatoes. If they get much colder than that, they get very grumpy. It can stunt their development, and sometimes they don't really recover from that. So when you've got a young plant, you want it to be growing continuously. You don't want anything to check that growth, and there's lots of things can do that. Getting too dry, getting too wet, getting too cold, but we want to try and avoid that. So I think where we are, we can start them off very successfully in the propagators. So compared to my previous location, that was also in the south of England. Now I'm in the southwest. It is a warmer region, just a little bit. On the other hand, we don't have the benefit here of the walls at the back of the greenhouse. So it's probably fairly similar. So we'll be aiming to get these plants ready for the end of April, or if we have a cold spell, the start of May. And now I think is a pretty ideal time to, so when we're doing this, It's right at the end of January. By the time I get the video out, I will probably be in February. So the propagators are one thing, and I'll also give a warning about propagators, because although they can really help to provide the right environment for germination and growth of the seedlings, there is a danger with them. It's an enclosed space, and on a sunny day, and we've had a sunny day today, it's just starting to cloud over now. When we first came up here to set things out, it was baking in here, and the propagator very quickly went over 25 degrees. I think had I set these out first thing in the morning, they could easily have got to a temperature inside where they might start to either inhibit germination or damage any seedlings that are there. And it's very easy to scorch, and in fact sometimes you completely ruin a seedling if you allow the temperature inside the propagator to build up that high on a sunny day. So if you're going to use a propagator in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, especially a heated propagator, because that starts at a nice temperature first thing in the morning, the sun comes out, and then it starts with that thermal gain to cook up the inside of the propagator. If you're not able to get to it every morning at the right time to open it up, add some air, maybe even lift the lids off if it's a really warm day, then you're probably better off starting indoors. There is really there's nothing worse than coming out, looking at your stuffed propagator and finding that you've just wrecked a whole batch of seedlings. So have to be a little bit careful with them. But so long as you can put the air on in the morning, then yeah, they can really help. And where we are, it doesn't get so cold at night that we have to worry about it. So we can kick off those seedlings out here, and as soon as they pop through, the light levels aren't great, but they've got the maximum they can have, and they're not in the windowsill sort of stretching towards the light. So that's what we're doing here. So I've set up this propagator. There's power in the greenhouse, which is great. Neighbour added that recently, and I've got that switched on now, and we're planning to sow tomorrow morning. So this is going to cook overnight. So what else am I doing? Well, I need to prepare my sowing mix, and I'm going to use my regular mix. We've got some multi-purpose compost here. We've got some coir, which I need to rehydrate, so that's come in a block, and I've got some vermiculite. So that's the three components in my standard sowing mix. And of course you can get a seed sowing compost, and the multi-purpose I've got here is a Melcourt one. It's actually very nice. Now there are still bits of woody bits and so on, so it really needs sieving for seed sowing, but it's a very nice compost. Obviously it's a peat-free mix, and that's very pleasant, and mixed with the coir and the vermiculite, I think you get a nice seed sowing mix. You can get a special seed sowing mix, and they make one, of course, in their range. They make all sorts of composts, but they're not that common. So this was the only one from that range at our local garden centre, and there might only be one seed sowing compost at the garden centre, and if it's not quite what you're looking for, then you're going to have to make up your own mix or order it. But for things like compost, you only need a bag or two of seed sowing compost to get you through the start of the season. It's not the sort of thing you want to be paying delivery charges for, so I'd rather make up a mix with a bit of sieved multipurpose and the coir, and I've had reasonable results with that. So that's what we've got to do. The other thing is we're going to get some water in the propagators here So I've saved some plastic bottles, and we'll fill those with water. We'll pop them in the propagators. Has two advantages, of course. You've got a little bit of thermal mass in there. That does help regulate the temperature a little bit, but also it means that when we come to water these seedlings later on, we're not going to be watering them with icy cold water. It's going to be at the same temperature as the soil. We'll get that soil blended up today, and we will fill some seed trays. No, we won't. We'll fill some cell trays, and we'll get those watered and in the propagator, and they can sit there. And tomorrow when we sow, it's going to be nice and warm. I'll do another video later because I'm going to soak the seeds overnight. I find that it can help with germination, and particularly with helping the young seedlings get rid of the seed casing. So I'm going to go through the varieties and set them out tonight. So when I come to sow them in the morning, I'm going to be sowing into soil at the right temperature. I can water them with water at the right temperature, and we give them the best chance that we can. I don't know if it makes that much difference, the water temperature and sowing into warm soil or not. Ultimately, it's probably fine margins, but there's no harm in doing it. It doesn't take long. I just have to prepare this today and sow tomorrow. I might as well give them the best chance I can. Right, onto the coir. So I bought the coir in this large brick. This is sort of the normal sized brick, supposed to make about 75 litres of compost at the end of it. Whether it's quite that much or not, I don't know. I've never bothered to measure it, but it does rehydrate and break down, and then it's quite a loose substance, and it does massively increase in volume. You can also get coir compost now. It's long been an ingredient in various compost blends, but you can buy it already hydrated in bags, the normal sort of size compost bags. I don't really see the point in doing that. It doesn't take that long to rehydrate, and it's a lot smaller to store a few blocks of coir around. You can get nice small ones if you only need a little bit. They're not as economical, but depends how much you need. If you only need a little bit, just get a small block, chuck it in some water, allow it to soak all that moisture up. So the coir is an interesting sort of substance. It's not bad as a peat substitute. Peat has some really great properties for seed sowing and propagation. It really is great for that. But otherwise, it's a pretty rubbish substance. It has almost no nutritional value. If it dries out, it's a nightmare to rehydrate and so on. So outside of seed sowing and cuttings, there really isn't that much use for it in my view. And coir is much the same. Almost no nutritional value, and it can also dry out and cause problems. One thing it does do is hold an enormous amount of water. So once it's properly hydrated, it is full of water. That can be a blessing and a curse. So it's great that you've got a substance that will hold the water, and it will drain quite nicely. But it also has a little bit of a sneaky habit of starting to look a little bit dry on the surface, and then you water it without realizing that lower down it's quite soggy, and of course the young plants, they don't like to grow into soggy soil. The roots need both air and water, and if it's saturated with water, there's no room for air. The roots will then, if there are roots there already and it gets soggy, they will start to decay. Or if it's soggy when you've sown, then those roots won't get into that damp soil, and you'll have stunted seedlings. I have done that a few times. If it does happen and you're not getting great growth from whatever you've sown, it's always worth knocking one of those plants out of the pot or cell tray, whatever you're growing in, and just having a look to make sure that the compost isn't saturated further down where you can't see it. And if you find that it is, and the roots are suffering, you can sometimes recover the situation by shaking off as much of the soil as possible and repotting it in fresh, less soggy compost. And I have done that once or twice with good effect. I'd much prefer not to overwater in the first place, and the coir is just a little bit tricky in that regard. But with seeds, you don't want to be sowing into a rich soil with lots of nutrient in it. Something like coir is pretty good for seed sowing. Of course, as the plants get larger, you need to provide them with plenty of nutrition. So at that point, I stopped using the coir. I really only use it in the very early sowing and potting on stage. Once I've got a decent sized plant, then I abandon the coir. Anyway, I'll get that block in a bucket here and start rehydrating it. Now that might look like a lot of water, but that is undoubtedly not enough. If you've got a wheelbarrow handy, you can just chuck that in the wheelbarrow and a whole load of water and cover it up, leave it for half an hour. What I'm going to do here is just leave this to soak, and then after a while I can come back and break up the bottom of the compost and add some more water if need be. And that is certainly not going to be quite enough to do this job. It's going to need more than that, but there we go. It hasn't taken long actually to start breaking down. And I'll just chew away a bit of this block now. I can drop that in there, that's better. And it's going to need a lot more water. Right, another 10 minutes or so, and that'll be close to ready, I would think. Well, that's actually about, I don't know, more than half, maybe less than 2/3 of the block hydrated now. Still a few slightly dry bits in there, but those will go soon enough, and it's quite a nice mix. I mean, that feels in the hand, that doesn't feel particularly wet, but when you squeeze it, there's a lot of moisture in there. So that's why you have to be quite careful. I mean, it is great that it holds that moisture. There's not a huge volume in cell trays and things. You need a substance that will hold plenty of moisture. You don't want your seedlings drying out. But on the other hand, you've got to be just that little bit careful that it doesn't get too soggy. And of course, the compost I'm going to mix it with and the vermiculite, and they're going to be a lot drier. So the whole mix at the end, I think, will be pretty much perfect. So I pulled the rest of the block out, and I just knocked all of the hydrated stuff off the outside, and I don't think it all fits in one of these trugs, so I'll rehydrate the rest of it another time. I've got plenty here, far more than I need for today's job, so that will do for now. So that's the coir ready to go, and now for some compost. It's a fairly coarse sieve, but it'll take out any large lumps of wood. And this isn't bad stuff actually. It's a whole mixture of stuff, but there are There are some twiggy bits in, and there's going to be twiggy bits in almost every compost now. But I like the texture of this. It feels like a nice quality compost. I've never used it before. We'll find out how well it performs later on. I don't think I'm going to remove too much with this sieve. Now let's still let some bits through. I don't mind that actually. I think that's not going to be a problem in this volume of compost. We just remove these nasty large lumps. That'll be absolutely fine. And then I want some vermiculite. You want to get a horticultural grade of vermiculite. You don't want it to be too big. This is a nice small size. Sort of a random amount. After it's mixed, I'll have a feel and see whether I like the texture. Now this mix at the moment is really cold, so it is going to make a difference, I think, warming that up in the propagator before we sow tomorrow. I'll give that a thorough mix. Now, you should be able to see, I think, on the camera that this is quite light now. There's plenty of moisture, but it's not too clumpy. Nice uniform mix. So I've got these rigid cell trays. These are a good quality cell tray that'll last for years. Depends on the size of the cells and the texture of your compost. You might want to firm this in a little bit. I'm not going to go too mad here, but this is quite a light mix, so just press that down a little bit. And if you're using small cells, this becomes quite important because there's not that much compost in some of the smaller cell trays. So you really want to firm that in, get a bit more soil in there. Right. That's it. That will probably slump just a little bit when we water it. And I think for the peppers and chilies, we should get away with just the 2 trays. So it's okay, just firm that in slightly. And then just top it off. Now this compost is already somewhat damp from the coir, so I'm not going to give it a huge amount of water. I'll give it a little bit more. Right, they can sit there until tomorrow and they'll be nicely warmed up. The other thing we've got here is a little temperature sensor, and we've got one in the propagator and we've got one in the greenhouse, so we can see what sort of temperatures we're getting at night, and that'll be useful later on. And down this end I've just put 4 bottles of water to slowly warm up, and we'll use those when we need to water the seedlings, but also they add a bit of thermal mass to the propagator, which could be helpful. So we'll be able to see how much lift we're getting off of this propagator and make sure that the peppers are doing okay. we'll also be able to see if we're getting too high a temperature during a sunny day. But then later in the season, when we're getting towards mid to late April and we're wondering when we'll be able to plant out in here, the log of the temperature, particularly at night, will be very useful in figuring out at what stage we can move into the big pots and take them out of the propagators. But that's it for this job. Obviously I'm going to go through the varieties and put them to soak later on, and then I'll pop back tomorrow and we'll finish the job. So that is it for this video. Thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.